What's up everybody, King Louis here with a combat guide for Chivalry 2. In this video I wanna go over some advanced concepts of the game. With advanced, I mean things that go beyond what the tutorial is telling us. Execution wise, there aren't really any very advanced or difficult maneuvers in this game, if you compare it to other medieval slasher games like Chivalry 1 or Mordau. Landing hits on enemies in big team objective modes is rather easy. You simply run around and hit people in the back, or just keep swinging and eventually someone won't block your attack. But what if your opponents are competent? Due to the held parry, it appears that if a competent player doesn't want to get hit, he won't get hit. So how do you actually hit people that are decent at this game? I won't go over the very basic mechanics and maneuvers like attacking, comboing, riposting, etc., as I do think the in-game tutorial already does a good enough job of explaining them. So if you're completely new to Chivalry 2 or the whole medieval slasher genre, I highly suggest playing the in-game tutorial before watching this video. Let's get into it. Higher skill engagements in Chivalry 2 most of the time revolve around counters. I think you could say that counters are the central mechanic of this game. If I duel someone and I use counters and my opponent doesn't, I will win the duel by disarming him. Good players know that, and because they don't wanna get disarmed, they use counters. Now the important part here is that not all counters in Chivalry 2 are 100% safe, and they can be exploited. The most common way to punish a counter is a feint. Feints generally hit faster than an incoming counter. Here you can see me winding up a counter against an attack. My enemy, however, feints his attack and hits me first. When I say feints generally beat counters, it means that there are exceptions. Here are some situations against the rule where feints do not punish counters. Firstly and most importantly, if the difference of the wind-up duration between your weapon and the weapon of your opponent is big. Meaning, if you have a slow weapon and your opponent has a fast weapon, it is likely that his counter connects before your feint hits. The second variable that determines whether you can punish an enemy counter attempt with a feint is how long in your wind-up you wait to feint. Feint windows in Chivalry 2 are absolutely massive. If you look at this Messer feint for example, you see that you can feint your attack until right before the weapon goes into release. Longer feints are more likely to not punish counters, depending on what weapons are in play. If you feint too early, your enemy might see the feint and can then counter the feinted attack rather than the initial attack direction, which is arguably easier to do. The third and last factor is the exact timing of the counter. Counter windows in Chivalry 2 are also huge. You can perform a late counter, or you can do an early counter. So to summarize everything in one sentence, if you're trying to counter an attack, you need to watch out for feints, but not all feints are fast enough to punish a counter. However, if you are trying to counter and you see mid-counter windup that your opponent is going to feint his attack, not everything is lost yet. Here you can use a defensive feint to defend against your opponent's feint. The way to do this is to start a counter attempt, and then after you see that your opponent feints his attack, you feint your counter attempt to mirror his feint. So here for example my opponent starts a horizontal attack which I tried to counter. Then I see that he feints his attack into an overhead, so I also feint my counter attempt into an overhead to defend against that. Now you could say, well, this game is easy then. You just counter every attack, and if your opponent feints his attack, you defensively mirror it and counter it anyways. This way you counter everything and will never get hit. Well, not really, because defensive feints are also not 100% reliable in every situation. For once, you cannot parry out of a feint in Chivalry 2. So once you commit to a defensive feint, you absolutely have to catch the enemy's feint with it. Depending on weapon speed and the fact that your opponent can excel, drag, or use a heavy attack for his feint, you might sometimes not be able to do that. To close out this chapter, here are a few final tips to this whole feint and counter interaction. Feints almost cost no stamina in Chivalry 2, so stamina preservation should never be a reason to not feint. You can feint an attack into any base attack except the one that you started with. You can feint an overhead into another overhead, and even a stab into an alt stab. It is also worth mentioning that attacks that already have been feinted are easier to counter than attacks that can still be feinted. So if an opponent feints a lot, it is often easier to wait out the initial attack and prepare to counter the feinted attack. Also watch out for combo hits. People can combo off a block in this game, aka the mindless LMB spam. These combos usually beat out riposte feints. And at last, feinting into a heavy attack will almost always be beaten by a counter attempt, so be careful with that. Besides feints, another way to punish enemy counter attempts are drags. Drags can be used to mess up counter timings and make them connect too late. Obviously, weapons with longer release times are better for dragging. Drags can be combined with feints and mixed up with light and heavy attacks to create attacks that are not always easy to counter. So again, to summarize, the plan to beat high-skilled opponents head-on is to bait counters by threatening to win the stamina war and then punishing these counter attempts with feints and drags, or a combination of both. The next game mechanic that can create the chance to deal damage to an opponent is kicking. While kicks work great in team objective, most good duelists use them rather sparingly, as they come with a relatively large risk. If your opponent reads your kick and attacks into it, you probably will get hit. Kicks are a great tool to kill very passive opponents fast. You often can't afford to slowly outstam an opponent in a team objective game, where you're surrounded by enemies. If you're trying to feint an attack into a kick, your opponent already might have started a counter for the first part of the attack, which then will automatically punish the kick. So if you kick, you usually want to do it from a riposte, as an unexpected mix-up from very close range, so your opponent has as little time as possible to react. Something you can do is to move and dodge backwards as your kick attempt fails and bring enough distance between you and your opponent, so that his punish won't reach you. At the same time, you can prepare a punish for the miss with your own attack. Just be aware that this move is not super safe and may or may not work depending on your enemy's weapon reach and timing, but it is nice to have in your repertoire. Another more advanced maneuver is avoiding kicks by turning away from them. Turning 90 degrees to the side appears to be faster than releasing the block, since the parry has a bit of a linger duration after you release the button. If you hold up the block and turn away fast enough so that your opponent kicks your side, you will not get guard broken. This move, while not super easy to pull off, seems to work pretty consistently. The last mechanic I want to talk about here in this video is jabbing. Jabs are a way to win back initiative from your opponent, as they cancel your opponent's wind-up and give you the right to attack. They also deal 10 damage, which is good chip damage. Never ever use jabs if you already have the initiative. If you jab instead of attacking on your turn to attack, you might actually lose the initiative, as your opponent can block the jab and riposte. Jabs are useful against passive opponents that have a faster weapon than you. Let's say you play with a greatsword against someone with a short sword. Out of neutral, you can never safely start an attack, because your opponent might just start his attack a split second later and hit you first. So what if he doesn't attack? Here you can jab spam until he attacks, so you can get initiative with a riposte or counter. It is difficult to give a general rule on what exactly you can jab interrupt and what not. You just need to get a feel for how fast the jab is and how long weapon windups are. Depending on weapon speed, distance and startup time, you can sometimes interrupt feints, drags or heavy attacks. But then again, why would you want to jab if you can also just use a counter and gain initiative and stamina? A clearly useful situation for jabs is to interrupt a combo attack. Anyway, that's it for this advanced combat tutorial. Let me know in the comment section below if this was helpful to you guys. If you enjoyed this video, then please leave a like and consider subscribing to this channel. As always, thank you all for watching and see you soon.